Are you a foamer? Well, I'm going to turn you into a model railroad foamer on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more videos about model railroading tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and hit that little bell icon so you can get notified every time I upload a new episode. In the teaser of this video, I used the term foamer, and I'm curious how many people know what that old term means. So take a second to respond to the poll up here in the corner and tell me what you think foamer means. Now, don't look at the comments yet. No cheating. I want to know how many really know what it means, and I'll be sure and put that actual definition in the comments down below. A few weeks ago, I published an episode about building scenery base using cardboard lattice, industrial paper towels, and several different types of plaster. I commented in that video that there are many ways of making base for scenery, and I'd like to use several different ones on my layout. Today I'm going to show you how to make scenery base using extruded foam and great stuff expanding foam to make a base that is carvable, it is sandable, it is flexible and versatile. Many people today really love this process. So let's head on over to the layout and see how it works. This is an area of my layout where I had cut out a section that I thought I was going to lower down, and I've decided to do something a little bit different with it. So this is a good time for me to show you how to put some foam in and how to install it using great stuff. You can buy at a can in any hardware store. And literally what I've done is I've just cut this. This is just 1/2 inch foam. And since I don't have real big spaces here, the 1/2 inch will work. Nothing real heavy is going to set on this, just some structures. But I'm literally just going to glue this in with this great stuff. I've cut this to fit. And so I'm going to pull it out now and set it back here. This piece here has already been glued in. And then I'm going to take my great stuff. You want to work very carefully with this because it can make a real mess. I want to be prepared. I've got a roll of paper towels handy. Also have a box back here off camera that I can stick it in. Because whenever you spray this, when you stop, it's not going to stop coming out of the nozzle immediately. A fair amount is going to come out before it stops completely. So you want to be prepared with a paper towel handy or a box that it can drip in, or in my case I have both. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work very slowly. I'm going to put down just a little bit of great stuff along these support pieces here. And you see I'm moving very quickly. So you don't need a lot of this down here. In fact, you don't want a lot of this down underneath because this expands. And so if you put too much down, you're going to, it's going to tend to raise your foam up and kind of make a bit of a mess. So here, I'm going to do that. That's going to hold that in place. And then I'm going to come in and see the stuff is still running out the end of the hose. So you want to make sure you got something to kind of wipe that off with. Set my piece of foam in place here. Now this up here, it doesn't really have anything under it. It's just kind of between this board and this fascia, and I literally am going to use the great stuff to just glue it to the fascia. Now I didn't mention, but let me mention right now, you probably noticed I have masked off the track that is here because it's so close to this. This expands enough that it would expand out on and make a real mess out of my track. By masking that, I can keep it from getting up on my track too much, and what does get up there I can then easily cut away. Now I'm just going to come in here in these cracks, and I'm going to just very slowly spray some great stuff down into these cracks and try to get it down in the cracks to fill the cracks. I know the way it's expanding, it looks like it's just sitting on top, but it's getting down inside as well, and that will actually help your foam adhere to the board that it is next to. I'm really getting carried away there, but that's okay. Once that dries, it's going to expand, it's going to dry, and then I can come back and cut it with a knife or a saw, just like I would the foam itself. I'm going to come in here and fill this crack and the gaps around this other piece that I glued on earlier. Now that our great stuff foam has had a chance to set up overnight, You can see it's all expanded well through the seams, and it's all very solid and set up. Now we're going to trim this massive excess back, and then we'll use some tools to kind of sand that into the shape that we want. First tool I'm going to use is a carpet layers knife, or maybe referred to as a linoleum knife. It's a type of utility knife that's got a long blade that you can break off in sections. These are very handy for working with foam because you can work a longer distance at a time. You also can get it where you want it and tighten this nut down right here, and it will stay right where you need it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim along my track work here so I can get that tape up. And my foam is actually just a little bit higher than my plywood in this case, so I'm going to want to be bringing that down. So I'm going to cut a little bit of angle, cut some of the pink foam as well as the excess of the great stuff off. And I'm just going to start here. I want to make sure that my blade ends up on top of the plywood. Otherwise, I'll kind of defeat my purpose in using the great stuff. Fill in that little gap there. And just going to kind of carefully work my way along the track here. As you'll see, literally, you can just pull it up away from the track because of the masking that's there. We trim a little bit at a time. We can always come back and trim off some more later. I also have the foam that's up above the fascia here a little bit. I want to round this down as well. And so I literally can, again, use my knife, come in here at an angle, and just kind of come along the top of my fascia and cut a little angle. This isn't the final work on this. This is just a rough cut to kind of begin the process. And there, you get the idea. You can literally just kind of cut that away. Now it's time to start carving this the way that we want it. Now, in this case, I want most of this to stay in place here, but I want to bring this edge down and kind of round this down into a hill down into this area. I've already taken the top off of this area here, but I want to kind of start to curve it down as well. And so I'm going to go back to my linoleum knife again, and literally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start carving away at the edge of this a little bit at a time. Now, you don't want to take too much at once, just a little bit at a time, and we're just going to kind of round this edge off a little bit and begin to work on making the contour of a hill. As we get into our great stuff, you're going to find that it carves just as well as the extruded foam does. And so I could just kind of carve and blend that together as I get down to that part. If there's a little bit of some gaps or some porous holes in between the two types of foam or in the great stuff, that's okay, because ultimately this is all going to be covered with some sort of a ground cover layer. I've been doing some carving and shaping of the foam that I've put in, trying to get it into the land form kind of shapes that I want. And as I've done so, as you see, it's just rolling down. I still got some space here. I don't want this to roll down too far, and there's enough differential between this upper level and the lower level here. I want this to come out just a little bit further. So I'm going to build this foam out just a little bit more using just the great stuff. Also, this area here needs some foam to kind of to contour it down, and so I'm going to use the great stuff for this section as well, and fill in just all of this right here with the great stuff foam, and try to fill this out a little bit. Also, this piece here that I've carved out where this little canal is going to be was loose in the middle because I wasn't sure how much of it I was going to be leaving, so I'm going to put a little of this great stuff underneath there just to help glue that down. And when you see what squirts out there, that's okay, because I can eventually carve that, and I need a little more out there to work with anyway. That's going to need some weight on it in a bit. But I'm just going to use the great stuff foam to build this up a little bit more. I'm going to try to fill this in really well out for just about 1.5 inches or so. I don't want to end up with a lot of gaps and stuff in there. Now this is going to expand way out, and And that's okay, because I can always carve it away. And in this area here, I'm just going to build this up across here a little bit. And come back over the top of it. Try to fill it in well enough that it's not going to leave a lot of gaps. And then I got a couple of gaps in here that I want to fill in a little bit too, that didn't get filled in quite deeply enough first time. And so I'm going to kind of fill those in just a little bit too. So you get the idea of how this works. And then we're going to come back then when this is all set up and carve this down some more. You can see that foam that I put down has had plenty of time to set up. This has actually been setting for several days. But you can see some areas where I went in to fill some gaps and some places where I needed just a little more foam. And this is more than giving me the amount of foam that I need. In fact, sometimes when you're using a new can, this expands way more than you ever think it will. And so, I didn't put down very much foam here from the can, but it's expanded incredibly to fill in those gaps. But that's okay. All I have to do is carve and sand that away. And I want to show you some tools that I use for doing this carving. I've actually already done a little bit of carving here. You can see here what I carved away from this section. I was just trying to add a little bit of foam to the bottom here. And I'm not done. I've just done some rough carving. But some tools you can use, and all of them have advantages and disadvantages. One tool you can use is a drywall saw, if you have one. Drywall saw is really good if you've got like some areas like this where you've got a lot of foam, whether it's the extruded foam or the great stuff, and you need to remove large sections of foam, and you need to do it very quickly. The drywall saw works really good for that. The drawbacks to the drywall saw are the fact that it's got a very rough tooth. So it's going to leave you a bit of a rough surface. You definitely want to do a lot of sanding or carving with another tool after you use the drywall saw. Also, it's going to take out larger chunks, so it's going to be pretty messy. Of course, working with foam can be pretty messy anyway, but that's one option if you need to remove a lot of material quickly. My favorite tools for carving are a hacksaw blade, not in the hacksaw. This is just the bare blade, and these are great because you can cut this material, and you can use the hacksaw itself as the blade itself as a handle, and you can get a very long reach with it. Also, you can bend these so you can curve your cut, and there's just a lot of flexibility with a hacksaw blade. I probably use this for carving foam more than anything else. And then, of course, a long bladed utility knife like this carpet knife works great also, because you can get a long reach. The advantage to the knife over any kind of a saw, even the hacksaw, is the fact that it's a lot less messy. The knife just carves it away. I cut this with a knife, and you see there's almost no mess here. But if I cut some of this, like this right here, I'll just start a little bit with a hacksaw blade. Just going to carve the top off. You can see, even with that, I've already made, a fair amount of dust. And the extruded foam is even worse about making the dust and the dirt. So it's very flexible. It's a good way to cut some stuff, but you're going to leave more mess. You're going to need to vacuum up more. This leaves virtually no mess behind. So whenever I can, I use the knife, but often I use the hacksaw blade. Once you've got it down close to the shape that you want it, I then use a Sureform tool like this. It's kind of looks like a cheese grater on the bottom. It's made for rasping and planing wood, I think, was the original intention. A lot of people use these for drywall work, but this works great for this too. Now, this is messy, but you can come in here and just scrape away the excess and make your final form and shape with this. See, like this, I want to get this gap out so that this is all the way down to the wood here, and so I'm going to use this until I get down there close. Back here a little bit. And you can see that's already smoothed that out, made a nice transition from the great stuff that I put down to the foam that I had already had in place. and it does a great job of shaping and removing some material very, very quickly. Very messy. You're going to want to keep your shop vac around. And then, of course, when you get the shape that you want, you can sand this material too. And what I usually do is whenever I'm close for my kind of final shaping, I use some coarse grit sandpaper. This is 60 grit sandpaper. And again, that will kind of do some final shaping. It's still going to remove a lot of material. You want to be careful with it. But, you know, this will kind of help you smooth things out and get that last final bit of shaping done. And then whenever I've got the shape exactly where I want it, I come in with some medium grit sandpaper. This is 180 grit, and that's what I use to sand it down. Now, I don't worry about getting this super smooth because I always cover this this material with something else, and for my final ground cover. And you can cover it with a number of things. You can use plaster cloth, a plaster impregnated gauze over this works great to get your final surface. If you want to cover it with a thin layer of like plaster of Paris, that works really, really well. I'm experimenting for the first time with something that has been around for a very long time. I've just never used it, and that is something called ground goop. And I'm going to be coming back and making another video about that very soon, and I'll show you exactly how that works and how I like it. But that's something else that you can cover this with. Some people just take this foam and sand it down smooth. You might get an even finer sandpaper, like a 220 grit or something, and sand this very, very smooth, paint it, cover it with ground cover, and just use the foam itself as the final, you know, ground base without anything over it. And you can do that as well. I don't like it as well because I don't always like the texture, but it will work very well that way. It takes paint very well once you get it sanded really smooth, and it's very easy then to plant, you know, trees and other vegetation into the material. I don't use foam exclusively. I use foam in some areas. Some areas, as you have seen and know, I also use cardboard lattice and plaster. I use a variety of different materials for different things, and they all have their advantages and they have their disadvantages. But foam is a great flexible material to use for a scenery base, and it can be a little bit expensive, the extruded foam, but if that expense isn't a big issue for you, or if you're not doing a real large layout, a smaller layout, foam is a great way to go. It's very easy to carve, very easy to make it look exactly the way you want it as far as your landform shapes are concerned, and it's a great option, so you may want to give this a try. Extruded foam and great stuff expanding foam insulation make great flexible and versatile materials for scenery base. If you've not tried this method for building scenic forms, I encourage you to give it a shot. It may not be the best method for every single application, but I find that in most instances it makes a great scenery base for your model railroad layout. I want to thank you for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure and give it a thumbs up down below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're there. Also, leave me a comment or question at the bottom of the page. Tell me whether you've used extruded foam before, what process you use for gluing it together and shaping it, or maybe you've got a completely different method for making scenery base. Tell us about that in the comments below as well. I'd like to take just a moment to thank those who have chosen to support Ron's Trains and Things through my Patreon or PayPal Me accounts. I really appreciate your support. It helps to keep my channel going, and it's going to eventually help me to do some much-needed upgrades to some of my equipment to help improve my production quality. If you've not checked out my Patreon page, look at the expanded description right below this video where you'll find a link to that page, and you can see the rewards and incentives that I offer to those who support Ron's Trains and Things financially. Or maybe you'd like to give just a one-time gift to help support my channel. You can do that through my PayPal Me account, and that link is in the description below as well. And of course, while you're there, check out my Amazon Pick of the Week. See some things that I find interesting and useful, because you might find them interesting and useful as well. If you do, follow that link. You can purchase those items, and if you purchase them through that link, I get a small commission that helps me keep this channel going as well. Well, that's all I have for today. I want to remind you I will not have a modeling video next week, as I am in Texas doing some cleanup and recovery work after Hurricane Harvey, but join me again in 2 weeks when I'll be bringing you the third and final installment in my Holt Hotel kit bashing series. You're really going to want to see how that project turns out and how it looks on my layout. I can't wait to see it. So I hope that you'll join me, and I look forward to seeing you then. Lizzie?